Hey, this is Andy Jenkins with the Oily App Plus podcast. Now, here is what Oily App Plus is. It is an educational web-based resource. You can grab it on your smartphone, you can grab it on a computer that actually empowers you, encourages you, and equips you to understand all products Young Living, and even more than that, because we're going to help you apply those to everyday life. So in the previous episodes, 4 weeks, we actually talked through the oils of ancient scripture. In this one, we're going to shift gears and we're going to roll out a new series, and we're going to take on the concept of emotional health. Now, this information right here, it comes from the class that Dr. Jim Bob and I shot on the Freedom Kit. Actually, both Freedom Kits. Young Living has a Freedom Sleep Kit and a Freedom Release Kit. We're going to talk about both of those in this next 5 to 6 weeks run. In this one, we're going to just talk about the idea, though, of emotional health and the reality that emotional health is for everyone, not just people that might have gone through a traumatic event. Let's be real about it. Everyone faces hard things. I mean, goodness, we just got off of a tough season. We're still, many of us, in the middle of a tough season that affected the entire planet. Aside from that, though, even just normal life is beautiful, but it's really, really hard. And it's almost a given that tough stuff will come. In fact, the wisest man who ever lived, Solomon, he said this: there's a time for everything. And then he spells it out: a time to weep, a time to dance, a time to laugh, and a time to mourn. That's in Ecclesiastes 3:4. And notice that he's talking about both extremes there of our emotions. Weeping on one end, and then joy on the other. Mourning on one hand, and then laughing. And he says there's a time for both. So that means none of us are immune to joy, but none of us are immune to the hard things either. And that tough stuff, it might come as a one-off or event, or it might come as a protracted season in which something difficult, it just seems to drip, to drop, to dredge upon you. Maybe you've been there and you've just thought, like that old game show, no more whammies, no more whammies, and then just, you hit it. Here's the deal, though. It's not a matter of if the tough stuff's coming. It's really a matter of when. And this isn't a doom and gloom. This isn't a okay, prepare you for the worst. This is just, hey, if we can talk now about emotional health when we don't necessarily need it, then we'll be better equipped when the time comes that we do need it. So rather than relegating this to an area that other people should consider, here's what we want to do. We want to evaluate how this might apply to all of us. So here's the audio from video number 1 of the Emotional Health Freedom Series, Claim Your Freedom, with Dr. Jim Bob and myself. So in the last year, I've actually spent a lot of time working with veterans that are coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan, suffering from, really, some of them have a clinical diagnosis with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, we're going to talk a little bit about it in this video, but what we've seen is that really colors how they view their perception of reality. So what happens is some of these guys may have been mortared over in Iraq, and they come over here and they hear thunder, and all of a sudden they're not reacting to the thunder per se. That's triggering and taking them back somewhere else to the mortaring in Iraq. And so this post-traumatic stress, it has really kind of become an imprint on the brain of how they start viewing all of reality.
Right.
In some sense, it may be that reality is something they should be afraid of or scared of. They could be in real danger. But in another sense, they may just be reacting to something that's not true, that's not actually there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And that's exactly what happens, because the limbic system part of the brain, which you guys all know is the fight or flight response, it doesn't know the difference in truth or not truth. It literally only gets stress. So when something stressful happens, and whether it's a loud noise outside or you're in war or whatever happens, that part of the brain triggers and it sends off all these signals, and it creates an actual memory imprint so that it can protect you for the next time you're there. It's called the anamnestic response, so that you don't forget about it. But what happens is then, now that you know, talking about specifically veterans, when they come home, now their new imprint of what normal is that. It's the fear, it's the tragedy, it's that alarm button in the limbic system. So instead of having a normal response to like thunder, their brain goes there for protection.
It could be your default way of seeing things. Okay, so I was thinking about this. We were talking earlier about that cartoon where there's a guy standing on one side, just like you and I are standing in different areas, and there's a 6, and I'm looking at a 6, and you look at it and you say, well, no, that's not a 6, that's a 9. And from my perspective, it is a 6. From your perspective, it's a 9. In some way, is emotional trauma something like that? Where
I mean, it's that, you know, perception is your reality. You know, it's that whole thing. It's like, you know, is it a 6 or a 9? Well, it may be a 6 and it may be a 9, and it may not be either. But the brain is so powerful that it literally will believe that the trauma is the truth instead of the other way around, and being able to decipher what a normal limbic system and a normal brain should do is you go, oh my gosh. But then your brain goes back and does all of the numbers work, so to speak, and goes, no, we're safe. Or we're not safe for a second, but hey, now we're good, and it calms down. In that type of scenario, that doesn't happen. It's like, no, we're not safe, and here's the new normal. And now, you know, reality versus not reality gets blurred.
So you talked about muscle memory, or well, you talked about mental memory, I guess, emotional memory, something like that. I guess this way of dealing with stress is somehow to the soul maybe what muscle memory is to the body.
Yeah, it's exactly like, so think about playing tennis. If you're creating a forehand and you're working really hard, you do a certain movement over and over and over and over to do two things. And you do it so that the muscles build up and get stronger in a specific movement, but you also do it to train the brain that that's what you want these muscles and these structures to do. Well, in an emotional scenario like this, the brain gets trained, and it's called neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is basically the building of the brain in a certain direction. Like
neuro meaning mind.
Exactly. Neuro meaning nerves.
Meaning you can bend it, change it.
Like Play-Doh. Like you can move it around and you can mold it just like Play-Doh. And the lining around the nerves is called myelin. And the thicker that lining gets because of neuroplasticity, it's basically like how much you use that nerve.
Okay.
The more and more you use the nerve, the more and more myelin or coating it puts on it, the more you go to that nerve, and the easier.
Hardwired.
Exactly. It literally makes that nerve bigger, stronger. Like literally think of it, it creates a freeway system, an interstate versus a side road, right? Out of that nerve. That's exactly what it's like. And so over a period of time, you can either create that neuroplasticity one of two ways. Little bitty repetitive activities or repetitive experiences or repetitive movements like a forehand in tennis over time, or one giant massive traumatic event or happy event. I mean, you know, think of a birth of a child. Well, it's a major emotional event. Right. It's not technically traumatic, but it is in a sense of it's just a lot of emotion at one time that creates an imprinting in that moment. The same thing that can happen with traumatic experiences like war or other things in real life.
Okay, so you talked about muscle memory, and I know athletes a lot of times train with muscle memory. They want to do repeating actions to where they get into the middle of the big game, and they automatically kind of default there. Combat veterans, they get the muscle memory with putting their gun together or reloading the ammo to where even if they can't see, they can put it together.
That's right.
But muscle memory works in everyday stuff too, like Ernie showed us this. It was a graphic that he showed us that said, hey, I've got a millennial anti-theft device. Right. And it was a picture of a gear shift. It's which is completely funny.
A manual shift car.
Right. But a 5-speed would be an everyday thing that's an example of muscle memory. The first time you drive that car, it's hard, but after time, you don't even think about it. You're just kind of shifting and moving and going by feel.
It's the things that move into the subconscious. They move from like conscious action and having to choose it to a subconscious activity that you just do.
My guess is with emotions and stress and how we feel anxious about some things, that can be big traumatic things, but it could also be everyday things as well.
Oh, yeah.
Just like, so it wouldn't take war to create feelings that are uncomfortable inside.
No, absolutely not.
It could be first responders could experience the same thing because they deal with huge things. But you could also have this if you were in a car accident.
Sure.
Or you could feel the same way if you were faced a mental or emotional or
well think of being
abuse.
in a negative relationship or just a negative environment, a negative job. Like, let's say that you're in a job that you don't feel valued, or you're like, almost verbally abused, like someone talking negatively,
just berated all of the time,
berated every single,
feel like it's going to be negative.
Exactly. Like, and you go in, or you think of kids, they have a teacher that they don't like. After the first few months of school, they literally physically get sick to not want to go to school because they don't want to have to deal with that teacher or that bully at school or whatever it is. That's not this big thing that happens right up front. It's little bitty things that build up over the course of days, weeks, or months that ends up training the brain and kicks the brain into this protective mode to try to keep you out of that danger.
So this neuroplasticity, you can build it up quick, fast,
right?
Like you construct something overnight, or just over time, slowly but surely, and it becomes your default response. Now,
exactly.
Now that we know that, and now that people are probably going, oh, okay, like this is making sense, because you're realizing it doesn't take a huge thing. A huge thing can do it.
Yeah, it's very common. Yeah.
Everyday things can do it too. And we don't need to be afraid of emotions, because, like King Solomon said, there's a time for everything. There's a time to laugh, a time to dance, a time to weep, a time to mourn, time to celebrate. We see all of those emotions. What is the next thing that we do?
Well, the next thing to do is, like, you see the emotion, it's acknowledging it, I think, like acknowledging that you're in the situation. Like, hey, I'm overreacting to this, or my child is overreacting to going to school, or, I overreacted when that car backfired, and actually taking stock of, I think I've got pathways that
something there.
Something's going on.
Yeah.
Like, I really overreacted to you when you said that to me. And I don't think that's me. Like something is different.
Out
and then
of character.
Exactly. It's out of character for my personality or yours. Like, once you get to that point, it's acknowledging, going, that's not normal, and then taking steps and making action, putting action behind it to start rewiring that part of the brain to remind the brain what truth is.
Okay, so that said, in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to give you some, step-by-step processes that you can go by through that will work for you, work for people that you love, if you're looking for actual steps that you can do to move forward. Video number 2.
It's so true. And the thing I would say before you go to video number 2 that you really need to hear, and your friends and your family need to hear, there's hope. Like, it doesn't matter how much the neurology has gone off, it can be rebuilt. Like, that's the beauty of the creation of it, is it's created to mold, it's created to adapt. And so, we've seen, we have friends that we've seen that have gone through the most traumatic events that a human being can go through.
Oh, I mean, you both
and they've rebuilt. It's true.
Tell our own
We've been through a lot.
Right?
We can tell our own, but I mean, knowing other guys that have been through even worse than us, and they're healthy, happy, and whole, and so it can totally be done.
And so, in the same way that neuroplasticity can work in the negative way, it can absolutely work in the positive way.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about that in video number 2.